Alright, now that we have a better understanding about aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the context of the business cycle, now it's important to talk about a very important idea. And that is the idea of the self-correcting economy. Now, a lot of this comes from the theoretical underpinnings between Keynesian and classical economics, but it's extremely important in the context of what we believe about how the economy works and how the business cycle works, as well as the timing of policy actions. Okay, so first we're talking about the self-correcting notion of the economy. Then I want to talk briefly about stabilization policies at the end of this video, but it shouldn't be too long. All right, so what do we know so far? Well, first, under the Keynesian model that we discussed in class, this PAE model, all right, what do we believe? Okay, well, the main argument here that Keynes says is, look, in the short run, okay, we have fixed prices, right? And because those prices don't change, okay, we often find ourselves in disequilibrium states. And in order to bring ourselves back, we need some sort of policy intervention. And frequently, Keynes was referring to some sort of government intervention when he was talking about that policy intervention. Okay? So, if we were in a recession, the government could get involved to bring us back to equilibrium. Okay? But the question I want to pose here is, what happens if we find ourselves in that type of recessionary gap, and what if the government does nothing? When in a recession gap, the government doesn't do anything. If we think about our business cycle, right, we have our fluctuations. What we're saying here is, what happens if we fall down here? Now, Keynes says, hey, if we're down here, let's increase G, which increases PA, which pulls us back up to here, right? But what we're saying now is, what happens if we're right here and the government doesn't do anything? Okay? What happens? All right, well, here's where we're going to start to talk about time. Keynes always talked about short-run fixed prices because his belief was, in the long run, we're all dead. Okay? Well, here's where this model becomes interesting, because we're going to now allow in this model prices to change. And you say, but wait, hold on. I thought you said we had this thing called menu costs where in the short run prices don't change. And to that I respond, you're absolutely right. So the question is, how are we allowing prices to change? Well, right now what we're talking about is the answer to the question, what distinguishes between the short run and long run? Okay, transition, short run to long run. Okay, what's the big difference? In the long run, prices are flexible. Okay, in the long run, when there is a shock, prices are allowed to adjust. They have time to adjust. In the short run, prices do not do that. Okay, so what we're going to say now is, if we find ourselves here, if we do nothing, okay, if we allow prices to change, okay, then, and excuse the handwriting, output gaps can be closed simply by changes in inflation. Okay? Now, in words, me just saying that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay? In reality, this is best understood through example. So let's do an example. Suppose we find ourselves in an expansionary gap. So again, a situation where y is greater than y star. Okay, now we're going to draw this, and I'm going to draw this under the assumption that we're already in the expansionary gap. We don't know why we're there. We're not concerned with why we're there. We're trying to understand what happens after we're there, right? So suppose I have my graph. I have y. I have pi. I have some long-run equilibrium. All right, there's my aggregate demand. Here's my long-run aggregate supply. There's my y star. All right, that would be the long run. Okay. Now, in this scenario, where are we? We're in an expansionary gap, right? So we're at some y. Let's say it's right there. We'll call it y1. We're currently operating right here. Okay? we're operating right here in the short run at a point where we have an expansionary gap. Okay? Let's call this AS0. Okay, so let's write down the steps here to make sure we're clear with what's happening. So first, we find ourselves in an expansionary gap where y1 is greater than y star. Okay? So what we want to know here is, how does the economy adjust in this scenario? Okay, now we're going to assume here there's no demand shocks, meaning holding all else constant, there's no policy shocks, right? So we're in an expansionary gap. What we're saying here is the government doesn't get involved. They're not trying to slow us down, okay? No policy actions, no policy shocks, right? So basically, AD is not shifting. Okay? So, if that's the case, how are we going to get back to the long-run equilibrium if we're already at y1? Okay? That is the question. Okay, well, there's something we need to make sure that we make clear, and this shouldn't be surprising, but when y is greater than y star, okay, what can you tell me about inflation? Okay, what can you tell me about inflation? And more specifically, what can you tell me about the expectations related to inflation? Okay, I'm going to tell you, if we're in an expansionary gap, what do we expect? We have the expectation that inflation is going to be rising. Okay, we expect higher inflation than what we have. Well, why? Well, first of all, if we're in that case, where we're acting at a y, or we're operating at a y that's greater than y star, what do firms see? Firms see an excess demand for their product, right? They see an excess demand for their product, right? Everybody's buying this stuff. That's why we're in the expansionary gap, right? So they see this excess demand for their product. How do they respond? What do they do as a result of that information? Well, naturally, they want to increase pie. And not really increase pie, excuse me. They want to increase prices, okay, which is akin to increasing pie, right? Everyone wants their product. What do they do? They raise their prices. Now, workers, seeing this, now keep in mind, we're in the long run now, right? So, workers have time to adjust now because they see the price changes, okay? Workers see that the price of their product is rising, the product they're creating, okay? The prices they're buying is creating. So in the long run, what are workers going to start to do when they sit down to negotiate their contracts? Well, they see prices are rising, right? So now they have this expectation that prices are rising. Okay, so what do workers do? Workers are going to bid up their nominal wages, right? So when they bid up those nominal wages, okay, and we already covered this in the in-class discussion, but when they bid up these wages, okay, this is going to be the same as a labor shift inward. Okay, labor supply is going to shift to the left. All right, and we did cover this in class. If this isn't clear, make sure you come and talk to me. Okay? And this is primarily because what? We have the rising wages and rising production costs. Okay, so AS shifts to the left. Now, as a result of that, that's like a decrease in AS. Okay, so as a result of that, our aggregate supply curve is going to shift in. Okay, and we're going to find ourselves back here at this initial equilibrium point. So real quick, just to make sure this is clear, when we actually started our story, we were operating at pi 0. Okay? Now, when we saw those prices start to change and prices start to rise, okay, we had some new expectation of prices that was higher than where we were. Okay, and this new expectation in the long run is where that would equal the new level of inflation when we get back to the long run. Okay, so how is the economy self-correcting? Because once we found ourselves in the expansionary gap, Okay, the prices by themselves, by their price rise, by these firms pursuing their best interest, and the workers subsequently responding by bidding up their wages in response to the price change, what we find is the economy self-corrects by shifting AS to the left and bringing us back to our original Y star. Okay, meaning when we find ourselves in a gap, in this case we're doing expansionary, up here, if the government does nothing, what does this tell us? At some point, we're going to find ourselves back at the long run equilibrium. So this is the case for an expansionary gap. We can have the same conversation, okay, except now, suppose we start and find ourselves in some kind of recessionary gap. So in this case, our Y must be less than our Y star. So I have my graph. Long aggregate supply. Have my aggregate demand. Okay. And here we find ourselves operating somewhere over here. Okay, so this is my Y star. Okay, and this is my original pi 0. Okay, and in the short run we're operating at this y1. Alright, so what's the story? y1 less than y star, we find ourselves in a recessionary gap. Now at this point we're not concerned why, we're in it. We're concerned with what happens after it. Okay, so we find ourselves in a recessionary gap. How does the economy adjust? Okay, again, we're going to assume there's no demand shock. Really what we're trying to say here is there's no policy action to bring us out of this. Okay, there's no government intervention. Alright. So what happens? Well, at this point what we know is when y1 is less than y star, okay, what do people believe? People have an expectation that prices are going to be falling. Okay, we're in a recession, right? We are in a recession. People cut back on spending. Prices should theoretically be falling if people are cutting back on spending during a recession. So this is pi 0. Sorry, excuse me. This is pi e. So this is pi e. And what we know is pi e should be less than pi 0 if we're in a recessionary gap. Okay. Now, again, where does that come from? Since y is less than y star, what do firms see? Firms are going to see an excess supply of their product. Okay? We're in a recession. They suddenly see this excess supply. They want to get it off the shelves. How do they get it off the shelves? They start to lower their prices. Okay? So they start to lower prices. That's the decrease in P, which sets off the future of lower expected prices. Okay, now, at the same time, just like in the previous case, if the prices are suddenly falling, okay, what are firms going to take this as an opportunity to do? Okay, firms are going to bid down wages. Just like in the last case, the workers wanted to bid them up. Here, the firms want to bid them down because they're losing money on this deal. So firms bid down the wages, okay, and this is partially driven by this factor right here, okay. The result of these two things, okay, and again, we already talked about this expectation inflation situation in AS, but the result of these two things is going to be an increase in the AS curve, okay, because of the changes in the labor market. I'm just going to pull our AS curve back to the right, okay, which pulls y back to y star, okay, and the economy just self-corrected with no government intervention or involvement simply because the price level changed, okay, which lowered our future expectations of prices, which bid down the wages, okay, which shifted the labor supply to the right, shifting the AS curve to the right, okay. Now, this is the self-correcting part of the story. Okay. The next question is, And this is sort of maybe more conceptual, so I'll really just talk about this for the most part. But the next question is, if indeed this economy is self-correcting, okay, if we truly believe the economy is self-correcting, if this is true, why does the government, or in many cases the Fed, get involved? Okay, if we know, when we go like this, if we find ourselves off here, the economy will self-correct back to some long-run equilibrium, right? If we know that's true, why spend all the time getting the government involved? What's the point? Okay, well, the key here is the timing. Okay, this self-correcting mechanism says, yes, we will indeed get back to our long-run equilibrium point. But the question is, when? How long does the self-correction take? Okay, and that was the key policy, or the key argument Keynes was trying to make. All right, so what Keynes is basically saying is prices are fixed in the short run. In the long run, we're all dead. We need market intervention to pull us back here faster. Okay, we don't have time to wait for that. Whereas, and this is how I started off the short run fluctuation section, the classical economists, okay, the C basically says, look, the economy is self-correcting. There's no need for involvement. We don't have to get involved. All right, so here's the question I'm going to leave you with in this video is, so who's right? Is Keynes right? Are the classical economists right? Who is right? And that's where I'm going to leave you with the age-old economic answer. It depends. So what does it depend on? Well, I would argue if self-correction is very slow. When I say self-correction, I mean if it takes a really long time for these prices to adjust and for workers to realize that adjustment and to bid their wages up or bid their wages down, if that takes a very long time, then I would say, you know what, Keynes is on to something. Okay? Let's use our government policies, let's use monetary policy to get involved, and if we find ourselves in some huge crisis down here, let's get involved to get us back up here faster. Okay? However, if self-correction is fast, then maybe we don't need to get involved. Now I'd like to tell you, hey, let me wrap this up in a nice bow and tell you this is how the economy works, foolproof all the time. The unfortunate reality is that's not how it works. Okay, the economics discipline is challenged and plagued by so many different moving parts at any given one time. These are two theories of how the business cycle actually works. I would argue that its true function is a combination of both of these. Okay, so it's important we understand where each one of these fit and how they fit together.